just to kind of put that into sort of more pictorial form, it's a very simple diagram, but hopefully it explains what I've just kind of said. So we know that we want to achieve this healthy body. And if you go back to the physiological studies, if you go back to looking at how the body works, what we know is that humans are biologically biased to prefer to be in actually a positive energy balance, which means they like to achieve energy balance and actually prefer to be in slight positive energy balance, not a negative energy balance, which is what makes restrictive eating, dieting, trying to cut back very, very difficult. And often the reason why many people will try and eat less, and they may notice a slight shift in their body mass to start with, but it's not sustainable and it's not maintained. So what we do know, though, is in order to get this healthy body, in order to get this bit here, and especially as an athlete, we actually need to do a lot of exercise. So, we need to train a lot, but we also need to eat a lot. And this is the thing that people are concerned about, it's the thing that people are confused about, and they don't really know what that means. And again, hopefully by the end of today, you'll have a little bit more idea of what does this mean? What does this actually mean? So, but without this kind of energy balance, you don't get healthy hormones. And without your healthy hormones, you're not going to have a healthy, functioning, adapting body. So I think that's the thing to understand, is that in order for us to adapt from training, we need to have sufficient growth hormone and sufficient IGF. And those two hormones are really important in order to help us to adapt from our training. And they are only released when there is sufficient energy in the system. So when there isn't enough, if you haven't put enough energy into your body around your training, if you haven't understood what your body needs in order to help have that hormonal cascade, this is when you may find that, you're doing all this training, but maybe you're not getting quicker, or you're doing all this training and you're not seeing the changes to your body composition as you would expect to. So these are some of the things to just be mindful of. And like I said, we're going to go through how you make that happen. Hormones changing is much more sensitive in the female athlete than it is in the male athlete, because female athletes have been, females are fundamentally here to reproduce. And so it's a very, very highly tuned and sensitive system. And with male athletes, it's not quite as important. So what we find is that female athletes' bodies will respond to low energy availability a lot quicker. So you might start to notice changes a lot quicker than you would in a male athlete. And that's something to be really careful of, particularly when you're working in this field. And it's, again, as we go through, hopefully you'll pick up some of the questioning styles and some of the signs to look out for, because it is much harder to identify in males than it is in females. And usually by the time we identify it in males, it's gone quite a long way. And if it's gone quite a long way, it can be quite difficult to then get back out of. So it's really important to understand what it is to be able to fuel appropriately. What does that look like for someone who's training very hard? We've already talked about immune function and the importance of that carbohydrate availability, but again, a number of hormones will be involved in that. And the one that people don't always appreciate is the digestive system. So something we see very commonly in our clinic is digestive issues. And often people will come in and go, and I've had IBS for years. And it's interesting when you start doing that kind of clinical questioning around, okay, so when did this start? And what does it feel like? And what does it look like? And what have you tried? You often notice that actually it all aligns with when they've upped their training volume, or they've reduced their intake, or there's been some shifts in their body weight. And often as well, it's linked, you sort of start to see an increase in injuries during that time as well. I'm not saying you have to have all of these things, but usually they're linked. And in females, you probably find they've had some sort of menstrual dysfunction as well. And really what's going on here is, so the digestive system gets affected in two ways. It gets affected because there's not enough energy in the system to do digestion. So you basically, the food moves through the gut a lot slower. But also what we know now is that there's something called dysbiosis that goes on. So all of you will have heard about the gut microbiome and the importance it is for our health, both our immune health, our mental health, and actually our physical health. And while movement and exercise is important in achieving that variety of microorganisms within our gut, we also know that when we don't eat sufficiently, and also if we push our bodies to an extreme, actually we get dysbiosis, in that we start to see a change in the microbiome, which then can have a negative effect on our health and our physical health and our mental health. So there's so much going on. And I guess the fundamental thing to appreciate here is that energy availability to support your sport is really, really important. When it comes to requirements prior to endurance sportive, requirements go even higher, because also you're trying to get full glycogen stores. And again, something we know about full glycogen stores, it's not just about eating a massive plate of pasta the night before. It's actually thinking about it 2 to 3 days beforehand. And the recommendations I often give to the endurance athletes I work with is, if your event is on Saturday, for example, then actually you should be increasing your carbohydrate around Wednesday and Thursday, so that you make sure you get nice full glycogen stores. And we know that it can take up to 72 hours for glycogen stores to be replenished and to be stored. So you want to make sure you've got that in advance. So sort of Wednesday, Thursday, you'll be thinking about it. Friday, you maybe go back to your normal eating habits, just because it's comfortable and you don't want to feel too full and bloated. And often if your event is on a Saturday morning, then I would say try and have your main meal on a Friday afternoon. So Friday lunchtime, and then have sort of more lighter, little and often snacks in the Friday afternoon and evening. And what this does is it optimizes glycogen storage. So actually you get better glycogen storage if you eat little and often, and you also make sure that you are hydrated rather than eating bigger meals. And again, the mistake that a lot of people make is assuming that they need to eat more calories. And it's not about eating more calories. It's actually more about changing the composition of your diet, so you take on more carbohydrate rather than changing the overall intake. So, for example, if you normally have eggs on toast for breakfast, it's a great choice. But actually, on those days, you might want to have toast or bagel, even, because bagel's got a little bit more carbohydrate, with peanut butter and banana, because that increases the carbohydrate, but it's still the same sort of component, but it increases the carbohydrate. If you normally snack on fruits, so like apples and nuts and things, then actually you start snacking on maybe like things like oat cakes or malt loaf. So I'm not sure what the equivalent is in Australia, but a kind of sort of more crackers and fruit bread, that kind of thing. So banana bread, that sort of stuff. We've kind of already spoken about this, but a couple of things I wanted to point out here about the specific role is that, so we know that it's the only fuel source suitable for moderate to high intensity training. And that's really, really important to remember and to focus on. We know that low carbohydrate availability around training, specifically in athletes, will impact the hypothalamic pituitary axis and specifically the production of T3. And I'm going to speak a little bit more about this as we go through. But it is something that, you know, in our clinic, we often test T3, which is a thyroid hormone that does measure energy availability. And we know that carbohydrate specifically is really important in ensuring that T3 values are optimal. So, you know, you can have somebody who may be getting enough energy availability, but if they're not giving their body enough carbohydrate, you'll get a decreased T3. And if T3 is low, then it's a feedback loop back to the hypothalamus that, oh, something's wrong here. There's not enough energy here. And then this is how we then get this sort of down regulation of the body. Again, we've spoken about this before, that insufficient carbohydrate has been related to a depressed immune system and poor recovery. And that's something that we do see, is that if you don't have enough carbohydrate, then you will notice that you don't recover as efficiently between training sessions. And, you know, while that might not be an immediate thing, you'll probably notice it over a course of several weeks, that it's not going to be it's not going to be enough to keep you feeling motivated as well. So it's really important. And then, as we said, it's a new area of sports nutrition, but we're definitely seeing more and more links between the gut biome and performance. And obviously we know that the key components to having a good gut biome is a variety of eating and lots of different types of food, but also very important that the foods that are important are whole grains, are beans and pulses, are vegetables and fruit. But again, making sure that you're not taking just vegetables and fruit on, which then displaces the amount of carbohydrate you need. So on that note, I want to talk a little bit about what does it mean, this kind of training low. So fat adaptation became very, very popular probably about 5 or 6 years ago. And suddenly every single coach was talking to endurance athletes about fat adaptation. So doing sessions fasted, reducing carbohydrate intake, and in the attempt to encourage you to use more fat for fuel, with the notion that when you're then in these long endurance events, your body's become more efficient at using fat, so you don't need to keep on top of your carbohydrate intake as much, because you can use fat for fuel. All sounds great. And again, Louise Burke tried to prove this because she really wanted it to be something that worked, but actually found that it didn't work. Now, where it gets confused is that there is a situation in sport where we call training low. So you might hear people using that, I'm training low, or we often see it particularly in cycling. It's a big thing about this kind of training low. And it can result in some adaptive responsive, but it does need to be monitored very, very carefully. So what does training low mean? So training low does not mean going low carb, high fat at all. What training low means is that you can do certain sessions in a carb depleted state. So you might do them in a fasted state in the morning, and they should be completed close to this first ventilatory threshold. So it's very, very low intensity. It's nothing. It's not even a moderate intensity. It is very, very low intensity, and ideally shouldn't be very, very long. Now, a lot of elite athletes will probably do 3 or 4 hours. I have my own question marks about whether that's suitable or not, but it is done. So I have to put it out there. But ideally, I would say these sessions should never really be longer than about 90 minutes is where I would go with it. It's what I tend to recommend. What it doesn't mean, what it does mean is that after these sessions, you then refuel appropriately with carbohydrate, and you still take on the carbohydrate requirements for that day. So we learned earlier that for about an hour of moderate training, you need 5 grams per kilogram of body weight of carbohydrate. So let's say you've done 90 minutes, 2 hours, but at a lower intensity, you're probably going to need around the same amount. And that carbohydrate intake then needs to be consumed throughout the day after this training session. So training low does not mean removing carbohydrate. And in fact, what we've seen is that if you chronically have low carbohydrates, so you do take out carbohydrates for over 3 weeks, it then starts to have this negative consequence on your performance and your health. And we definitely see this change in economy of your ability. So economy, I'm sure most of you know, but the economy is the amount of oxygen you need per minute of exercise. And it's really important in endurance sport. And what they found is that if we don't have enough carbohydrate, this economy falls. So you become an inefficient athlete. And what's difficult is that often people say they feel, there's 2 camps. One camp is that it feels awful to start with if you try and go low carb, high fat, but then you adapt and you feel great. And another camp is actually you feel great to start with because it can often feel like your glycemic control is better. But then you start to feel really awful as time goes on. But what we're saying is there is no evidence to support low carb, high fat in an athletic population. Now, when it comes to different populations and health and stuff, that might be a whole different ballgame, and it's not my area of expertise. But I know from a sporting perspective, there'd never be a situation where I would encourage it, because there's not enough evidence to suggest that it's going to actually help performance.